This bonus series was launched in cooperation with SIX, the Swiss Stock Exchange. It focuses on the companies that completed the first Sparks IPO Academy course, a 6-month fast-track IPO training program designed for high-potential scale-ups. And now, on with the show.
To date, and I mentioned the volume that we've done already, we've had 0 losses globally.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean...
That's really crazy, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not suggesting we never will. I mean, lending is lending, but it shows that the product can work.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Ben, a very warm welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. It's been a long time coming, as you know, so it's great to finally actually get here and have a chat with you about the business.
Absolutely. You're the CEO at TP24, a company making business credit easier and also more accessible. Before we talk about your company, I actually want to start with your personal background. You studied architectural engineering in university, but then went on to work in finance, banking, insurance, etc. Did you actually have a change of heart after university?
No, I didn't. I guess I'm an engineer at heart always. I think I love the mathematics of what we do here as well as in the engineering kind of world. It was something I was always quite good at. And being somebody that was not great at academia, so I never had the best results, whether it was my kind of secondary school or college. I think maths was the one thing that I clinged onto and did very well at, that kind of dragged me through everything else. But no, I think I was one of 2 people in my entire school to go to university. So I came from a pretty working class town in the northeast of England, where not many people kind of got the opportunity to go to university. And if you did, you had to pay for it. So within the first few weeks of being in university, I got a job with GE Capital, basically selling things on the phone, financial services, mainly insurance. And I worked kind of 3 nights a week, plus then the weekends.
Wow.
So over the years, that became longer and longer, and I was spending more time in GE than I was at school, at university. Reflective of my result a little bit as well, I think. I just became obsessed with it. I loved the work. I loved the variety of what we were doing in that environment, and I excelled at it. So it got to the stage where I kind of finished my degree, and my boss at the time, I was head of operations. I was 22. I had about 1,300 FTE under me, which at that age was unbelievable. Yeah. But that was GE. I mean, GE back then was still under the kind of Jack Welch way of doing things. They pushed you very early, very hard to learn and to take on lots of responsibility. And I thrived in it. I absolutely loved it. And I feel bad saying it now, but my decision point was, well, if I'm an engineer in London, structural engineer with 15 years of experience, I can earn X. And that X was significantly lower than what I was currently being paid at GE in a job that I actually loved. And I thought, well, do I want to work the next 15 years in what I've studied and end up earning less than I am today? And I suppose a very cash-focused 22-year-old when I think I'll stick at what I'm doing, and that's the honest truth of it, to be honest. But I loved it, and I never looked back, and I spent 16 years with GE.
Wow. But I mean, of course, there was the cash, right? But at the same time, this also sounds like a second school, a second education that you went through after university, basically.
I think I only appreciate that in the later years. So when I started when I was 18, and you don't really know anything better other than you're going on training courses, you're learning new things. I think in my early 20s, I was a green belt, and then by my mid-20s, I got a black belt in Six Sigma. I'd done several kind of commercial management courses in Croninville, the university that GE has in the States, some advanced commercial training. And I think I just kind of took it for granted that that's how people worked and that's what they did. And I think only now, post GE, I realized how invaluable that training was and how it ingrained very much the engineering methodology, actually, and how I approach anything in my just general working practice, because that's all I've ever known. From 18 to being mid-30s, it was GE.
Right.
So, yeah, no, it's an incredible school. And I think the only thing I kind of disliked a little bit in the end of my career with GE was when Jack Welch kind of era finished. And he was very much like, you spend 6 months in different business units, you get thrown in the deep end, you learn everything, and it gives you an immersive kind of, let's say, view of the business and the culture, and you can very much turn your hand to many different things. I guess with Jeff Immelt, he was very much the opposite. He wanted you to stay in your lane, really hone your art and skills of being in that role for 4, 5, 6 years. And that became a bit difficult, I guess, in the end for a lot of people, because they were used to that flexibility and challenge of moving every 6 to 12 months into something different, and that dynamicness that you get from that. But yeah, no, it was a great school, and I traveled the world with GE, did many cool projects. It brought me to Switzerland, which ultimately is where my family now is, and my happy place. So I can't complain.
What was that change of management style that you referred to before? The ending of the Jack Welch area. Was that then also the reason why you decided to leave the corporate world after 16 years and moved into the startup, the entrepreneurship world?
No, it wasn't actually. Unfortunately, and I think this was the wrong move on GE's side, and it's too detailed and long to get into in this conversation. But post the financial crisis, GE decided to exit financial services globally. So GE Capital, which was a mixture of commercial and consumer banking, was exited at a global scale, which meant that businesses were either sold, split up, broken up, or IPO'd. And I was responsible for some elements of the commercial bank in Switzerland, some elements of the consumer bank. And then I also helped on the insurance side with many of the other smaller businesses like healthcare, aviation, etc. within Switzerland. And part of that kind of process with GE for the capital business was IPOing the Swiss Consumer Bank, which was the largest bank entity in Switzerland, which has now become Cembra, or Sembra, as some people say, which is, I believe, the largest consumer bank in Switzerland. It's an incredible business. Has great people still today. It's doing incredibly well. I think I couldn't be more prouder of that business, being a part of that, even a very small part of it back as it became Cembra. But it's really flourished, and it's got a great new leader in place who's ex-GE, went into a different world, learned some new tricks, and then came back into that world that he knew very well, and has picked up the reins from what I would say was a very difficult leader to follow, which is Robert Altmaier, who was an out-and-out GE CEO, 20 years, just absolute executor. So yeah, it was a shame to see that business kind of, let's say, IPO and come out of capital, but it was a very great experience for the team and me personally, being on that deal team. And then the commercial bank, we just basically broke up and sold. So part of it we just ran off. The other part of it we sold to Arval, which was the leasing business. And that kind of created a home for me in the consumer bank. So I ended up joining Cembra totally. That was my full-time role. And I enjoyed it. It was a great period of time in my life where I got to look after my existing P&Ls, but I also got to spend some time in the open market looking at opportunities for the bank on an M&A basis, because the bank sat on a lot of cash. I think unknowingly, and something that I learned, I guess the hard way, was a new board post an IPO had zero willingness to invest in anything new that wasn't mentioned in that offering memorandum just 6 months or 12 months beforehand. So I was coming up with all these great new ideas and potential acquisition opportunities, and just there was never going to be an output to that anytime soon, because the bank really had to find its feet and fulfill its promises that it had made within that offering memorandum. So I guess I got frustrated quite quickly with that, but I guess through that process, I became a lot more aware of the open market, of the problems it was facing, and that ultimately was what led me to leave and set up TP24.
Amazing. And you did so in 2016. You were 3 co-founders in total. Where do you actually meet your co-founders, Martijn and Colin?
Yeah, so Martijn was a friend of mine for a couple of years before we started this. Our wives actually worked together, so we were kind of expats without kids at the time. So he was my weekend drinking buddy, and we just was very close friends. But he's a out and out kind of corporate banker, understood that kind of corporate banking space, had covered everything from SMEs all the way up to large corporates across several different big kind of global banks, including UBS was the last one that he was at. And knew he would bring a great deal of knowledge to the business about that side of what we were trying to solve. And Colin is probably a lifetime veteran in trade insurance and trade finance. Works for Marsh, is a partner for Marsh for that particular area, still is today. He didn't ever join the operational business, but brought an extremely large amount of knowledge to how we can do things more effectively versus the last 20 or 30 years of how things have operated.
Fantastic. And on your website, you actually mentioned that all too often, I quote here, finance products hold great businesses back. So in what exact way does that actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to why do we exist? What are
Right.
we trying to do? And I think if you think about the segment that we operate in, and this is really important for our business because we do operate in a bit of a different segment to other fintech lenders. If you want to borrow unsecured capital, working capital, anywhere in the world, up to say $250,000 equivalent USD, then you can pretty much have 5 offers on your desk at the end of the day and cash in the bank the following day in any market in the world. Yeah. That's pretty straightforward capital. As soon as you go above that, there starts to be a need to collateralize. And we kind of operate in the 250,000 to 5 million space. So a typical borrower of ours, whether it's in Australia or here in Switzerland or in the UK or in the Netherlands, would have a typical credit line of about $1 million USD. So it's a significant uptick of an average lending facility than the standard kind of fintech space. And when we look at the open market of what was available and what we were trying to kind of fix was historically bank credit lines used to do this very well. But I guess post the financial crisis, tightening of things through Basel III and general kind of focus on cost for banks and all the usual story, legacy systems, too many layers and everything else. These kind of products became very difficult to manage. And I think the risk-weighted assets on a unrated SME is probably the highest in Basel III. So it's a very difficult thing for banks that are capital constrained to be able to continue to provide. And then when you overlay the fact that a lot of these products became unprofitable because of compliance and additional operational costs and many other reasons, the banks just really started to step away. So if you get banked today with a credit line, well done. It's quite an achievement, regardless of what market you're in. And I think it's great to see that still happens. And I think my kind of absolute respect to the cantonal banks in Switzerland who really still stand there and support the SME business and the SME kind of backbone of this market. Not always through cycles. You'll start to see them come back a bit now because often they don't risk price. They just try to put the cash out there to help. But in a risky cycle like we're entering now, they would be a little bit, let's say, different with how they would approach that. But not to take anything away, the cantonals do a great job in Switzerland, and I think it's unfortunate that many other countries don't have that backbone of banking support. But basically, if you can't get banked, then you've got really 2 ways of raising money as a business. Real estate, which not many businesses have. Right. And unfortunately, what we've seen in certain markets, and very much in Australia, where obviously we've had a presence for a while now, is 96% of business lending in Australia is real estate backed, but by the private home. So your family's home is on the risk table for your business.
That's an immense pressure.
if you imagine the pressure anyway an entrepreneur goes through, and a business owner, to have that on top is just, for me, I'm really against this. I have a really medium-term goal in Australia to get our cost of funds to a level where I can compete against this segment and really change the game there and offer a direct alternative in the same pricing segment. And we're not far away from that. I think towards the end of next year, we might be able to get there. It's really a scalability thing. So you've got real estate, and then I guess the alternative outside of real estate is receivable-backed lending. And this takes two forms today, factoring or invoice discounting. And they're very similar products. In different markets, different products lead. So in the UK, it's very much invoice discounting. In Australia, it's a bit more factoring. But there's a very small nuance in what the differences in these products are. But ultimately, it's a product that hasn't been redesigned for, well, ever, I don't think. I think it's pretty much been the staple offering in most markets. And historically, I would say, in most markets, it's been a funding of last resort. But probably over the last 5 to 10 years, it's become a bit more of a staple funding source for many companies that aren't getting banked and don't have real estate. And look, I mean, from a business model perspective, it's not a bad one. The companies that operate it can make money. They can offer a longer term facility for these customers that need the cash. But it's not a very customer friendly structure. I mean, we tried to reinvent in two ways. We wanted to reinvent an alternative to this receivable-based factoring. And we wanted to reinvent it from the customer side, and we wanted to reinvent it from the capital market side. And I think as I kind of tell you a little bit about our product, you'll see the differences in what we've changed at the front end for the customer. And that was really at the heart of what we did. I think many companies automated and brought in digital systems to help them reduce operational risk and reduce cost. But for want of a better way of saying it, nobody cared about the customer experience though. That experience was still the same. This was about their margin. And if we learn anything from businesses around the world that have done well, you need to look after your customer. And if you don't, somebody else will, and you'll lose them. And that's really what we're trying to do. But at the same time, I think what was really important for us was to try and find a structure that worked for banks as well. Because when you get rid of all of the bells and whistles, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get capital to where it's needed in the most efficient way possible with the least add-on possible. So, because if we can get these SMEs well capitalized and well funded, they can grow and they can then flourish. The economy will then flourish as well, because in every market of the world, it's a known fact that 95% plus of the GDP generated is from SMEs. So, and these are often the guys that get the bad end of the stick, let's say, in times of difficult cycles, or when banks need to save money or products need to be cut. It's these guys that get hurt. So we wanted to create a product that was capitally efficient and also operationally efficient, that if the bank wanted to, it could still support that segment, versus today where it really struggles to do that. So not just direct into market, but also enabling the banks to re-enter that space and really deploy their own balance sheet. So kind of that was the goal. As you said, we launched we founded in 16. We were lucky enough, and I always say we were lucky enough to kind of find the prettiest girl at the prom very early on who wanted to dance with us. These days it's debatable how pretty they are, but Credit Suisse was very interested in us very early on. And I don't want to do Credit Suisse a disservice. I do. The guys there are brilliant. They're a fantastic Swiss business. I can't say the same about the let's say their investment bank seems to be a little bit different, but the Swiss business is fantastic. They've got incredible knowledge. They've got great teams that do great work on a regular basis, and we benefit from that as a business. And that we were lucky enough that they came in very early, before we'd even launched. Said, look, we've heard about the product. We'd really love to get involved in it. And I guess, fortunately and unfortunately, the good and the bad of that story was we were the first fintech that ever worked with. We were the first fintech they ever were going to distribute with under our brand, not theirs. It wasn't white labeled. And therefore, we met everybody and his dog in Credit Suisse, because everybody wanted to get involved in this due diligence to make sure that it was the right business, it was the right product, and there was no holes. So we spent 6 months in due diligence in 2017. And at the time, we were pre-revenue. There was two guys in a little box office in Talca, which is a street, for those who don't know, in Zurich, not far from Praterplatz. And thankfully, because we had some very supportive angels, they kind of helped us through that stage where we were extending out the time before we were going to make revenue to get this deal over the line, because we knew if we launched with Credit Suisse as the first market entrance, it would be far better than trying to grow out directly.
Definitely.
And kind of halfway through that, so six months into 2017, Credit Suisse decided they also wanted to invest, which was also great news, but it was a different team.
Sure.
So we then went through a separate due diligence with Credit Suisse Entrepreneurial Capital, which then pushed that whole due diligence process for maybe 10 months. We signed it in October 17 and we launched in January 18. I guess the lesson from us was, yes, it was worth it, but my God, it was very close in regards to keeping the business afloat while not making revenue. And I guess from Credit Suisse's side, the feedback was, look, guys, whilst we're very, very happy that you came in and that you're interested in supporting fintech and looking at new and better ways of doing things for your customers, you can't do 10-month DDs with new businesses. You got to be faster. Not many businesses will have supportive angels like we had, and
definitely, yeah,
they can fold quite quickly if they're not generating revenue. So it was a good all round. But I think we launched in 18 with them, and we've been active in the Swiss market with them ever since. So.
Amazing. That's really a strong start, right? With that big player as a backer and as a user, basically, as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times we use that name over the years.
Definitely. Can you also talk a bit about your business model, how you actually make money and how the business model behind TP24 works?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when we looked at this kind of global receivables space, so factoring and invoice discounting, we saw really one commonality across everything, which was on the structuring side, it was all done on individual receivables. So they may take 20, 30, 50, 100 receivables from each borrower, from each company, but each one was individually kind of looked at. It was individually insured, it was collected, it was individually funded, which was just the way it was done. And that was whether it was Credit Suisse themselves in their factoring unit before we took over, or if it was Bluevine in the US, who's a really big dominant fintech in that space. But I guess what that creates on the customer side is a huge amount of reconciliation, because each individual receivable they're issuing to their buyers could have different payment terms, has a different risk quality, has a different insurance cost. So every single week they're having to reconcile back to their balance sheet the advance payment plus then the residual post fees and everything else. And if you times that by a few hundred on a monthly basis, this becomes an incredible monster that you have to manage. So this was probably the biggest issue that all customers had with this product, followed quite swiftly by its price, the fact that they lose control of the relationship with their client, which was a big one for me, because I think if they've done the hard work of getting a buyer that likes their product on board, which is, everybody knows, I mean, getting that customer is the most expensive point in anybody's business. So when you've got them, you want to make sure they're happy and you keep them. Right. If you've then got somebody running after them because they're 5 days late on their payment, who isn't from your business, but from a business that doesn't really care, they just want to get paid, can quite quickly damage that relationship. So there was a number of kind of things going on that side, which we wanted to solve for. And then when we looked at the capital market side, so how are these businesses funded? We felt like there was more efficient ways for us to be able to actually structure the debt in order to be able to get lower cost of funds and ultimately a lower cost to the customer. So what we did is we effectively commoditized a structure called securitization. So we took, instead of individual receivables, a portfolio, so the whole ledger. We created over-collateralization by removing things from that ledger that we didn't like, didn't fit the model, was intercompany, we couldn't insure, for example. But one of the things that was really important to us, and because we didn't want a product that didn't give the same advance as a factoring product, for example, which can be 90% of an invoice, we covered global receivables. So in order to support export and in order to be able to leverage the entire book, we wanted to be able to cover all invoices for a Swiss company or a UK company or wherever the company's based to wherever they're exporting in the world as well. And by being able to simplify that journey for them and have a one leverage solution for domestic and export was a real kind of, I guess, win for the client, because it meant that a lot of their trade finance business they didn't need to do anymore. And that was very clunky, very single invoice focused, and very expensive. But also it meant that we could have a slightly lower loan to value, but on a bigger pool, and therefore lend the same as the other guys on an aggregate basis. So that was the kind of the first point. And then we built a system that would deploy that. So we wanted to obviously make it automated and make it very scalable. And that's still a journey we're on. It's not perfect. We are continually investing and trying to automate further within the businesses. But I guess what really came down to it, and the crux of it, was the insurance. So most SMEs deal with other SMEs. They maybe have 2 or 3 big corporate clients, usually one, and then everybody else they deal with is small. And in order to be able to get this coverage across the entire ledger, we had to be able to get an insurance limit for a Chinese buyer who has 500,000 turnover, and one in Argentina with 250,000 turnover. Regular customer, but very small business on the other side. And if you know anything about trade insurers, they typically do open market and balance sheet reviews. So a listed company is very easy for them to look at. A company that's a big corporate or a mid-cap is very easy because they have balance sheets readily available, they're audited. So they carry limits on larger clients, but the small SMEs, no chance. They just don't have the data.
Yeah.
And because they typically do manual reviews for credit limits, they also don't have the ability to, from an operational perspective, to give me tens of thousands of limits on small buyers around the world every week. So they kind of laughed at me when I asked them about this, which was a bit soul destroying at the time, because we thought the whole journey was finished. Because if we weren't able to wrap this structure, then getting cost of funds at a level where we felt was acceptable would be impossible. And our structure has a AA wrap. Nice. Which, from a risk-weighted assets perspective, is very interesting for the banks. And also, generally, as a security structure, means that we can drive cost of funds in the Swiss market, for example, at under 2%. So it's incredibly important. And they just couldn't do it. So we kind of re-looked at it and said, well, how do we get past this? So I won't go into the depths of the detail, because it's a bit of our secret black box, if you like, but we restructured the insurance. And we changed a lot in how the insurance works, where possible, because a lot of it's backed up in global reinsurance agreements where it's very difficult to change. But where we were able to change, we changed, and we effectively removed the insurer slightly from the risk while still covering the risk that we needed ultimately. And in return for doing that, they gave us the ability to write our own limits through a trading history algorithm, as well as several other parameters and third-party data sources we pull in, that allows us to say, Chinese buyer, 250,000 turnover, here's a limit of 30,000. Buyer from Brazil, 500,000 turnover, here's a 60,000 limit. And we could do that then at scale. And we've probably done, 5 to 6 billion in volume since we launched of processed kind of receivables. And a very high proportion of those we've issued the limit ourselves, which has allowed us to be able to have a very unique approach to the market, to the product, because nobody else can deliver what we're delivering, because they're not able to get the limits and the insurance for it. So we sit here 5 years later and nobody's ever copied us. And I think it's because of the complexity of the 3 verticals that we have. So the system, the financial engineering, the insurance engineering, all built to work together, is just a very difficult thing to copy. But I guess the output of that, which is the most important, is we have a AA over collateralized asset for the capital market side, which can then be tranched, where we can have a senior lender, a junior lender, and we can put our own skin in the game at the front end of that debt stack, which obviously stands for a lot usually, and sometimes is required by the law, but is certainly a better structure than a straightforward line from a credit fund. And then on the customer side, we have, because we're no longer taking individual receivable risk, we have very limited interest in individual receivables and the details on them. We have a structure around monitoring them and making sure they are what they need to be. But ultimately, we don't ask the customers daily questions on receivables. They don't need insurance anymore.
Yeah.
There's no reconciliation because we're not lending against receivables. We're just giving them a credit line secured against a floating asset that we just keep an eye on.
Right.
As long as that asset is where it needs to be, the customer can just use it freely like a credit line.
You're good,
like what you used to get from the bank almost,
Right.
So it just gives the customer a very, and it's obviously much cheaper because it's very structured in the back end, which means we can be incredibly price competitive. So all of the problems that the customers told us they had with the kind of incumbent products, we've solved. And every customer that comes on board loves the product. Our challenge is just getting it in front of the customers and getting them to switch.
Sure. Yeah.
And as I say, I think even today it's still globally unique as a structure for the SME space. I think if you go up to the large ticket, 500 million, 1 billion kind of structures, that's really where the essence of this product came from. But it's very secure. To date, and I mentioned the volume that we've done already, we've had 0 losses globally.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
that's really crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting we never will.
Sure, yeah.
Lending, but it shows that the product can work and it can really provide a solid collateral base to sit behind lending, and hopefully that gets banks comfortable that they can get back into that space and really feel comfortable they can do that, but also take the risk-weighted asset reduction on the fact that it's a AA asset versus an unrated SME.
That's really fascinating, Ben. How do you actually charge? Do you charge only on the company side that actually wants to get the loan from your side, and you charge a higher fee of interest there, or how do you charge?
It's kind of the old school banking model, right?
Yeah.
It's you borrow at one rate and lend at a higher one.
Right.
We just have a fixed interest rate that we charge the customer on drawn amounts, and then depending on the market, there's sometimes a facility fee. But that's really dependent on what the market pricing looks like. And I guess it's not something I kind of mentioned earlier, but again, that's a really, really kind of valued point from our clients. They know what they have to pay. It's very simple and straightforward. If you compare that to factoring pricing, where you've got individual pricing on receivables, you've got, take a look at a factoring contract, 30 different fees. There's an audit fee in there, there's a late invoice fee, there's insurance fee. There's so many fees that in the end you don't really know what it costs you, and when you work it out, it's incredibly expensive. I've not seen a factoring program outside of a bank that's less than double digit.
Wow.
And that's an expensive piece of capital for a business.
Definitely.
So we're very much in the kind of mid to slightly high single digits. And only are we just getting into double digits in Australia now, but because the BBSW, their base rate is really moving quite fast.
Yeah. Of course, you have to adapt to the market to a certain degree, but
it's like a floating facility, but it does mean that the top end then it becomes a bit pricey. But
right, yeah. But in any market condition, you're still very competitive with your rates, basically.
Oh, absolutely. We will not lose a deal on price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to talk about, if we hear about the sums that you are moving there and how you help SMEs, to get the credit line, and also, of course, of building your own business, that is a lot of pressure and a lot of topics on your plate. So, of course, also the question comes up, what does that do to you as a founder, having all these stakeholders, all the pressure, and basically everybody wanting something from you? What does that do to you on a personal and mental health level?
Yeah, look, I think mental health is a topic that's very close to my heart. Generally, I think it's something that's not discussed as much as it needs to be. And I think if you look at this kind of entrepreneurial space, everybody wants to sit in this chair now where I am and tell you how great their business is, how the new investors should come and look at us and everything else. And that's great. And they should use this as a forum to do that. But I think for me, I'd love to use this forum to really open debate about mental health, especially in this space, because entrepreneurs, and I mean, I am in awe of people that have made businesses successful. And when I walk down the high street in Zurich now and I look at these companies, I never thought of it in this way, but somebody started that many years ago and went through exactly what we're going through and ultimately created a global business. And I take my hat off to these people. I mean, they've done an exceptional job because it's incredibly hard. I thought after this many years we would be through a lot of those kind of stress points, and we're not. And I think we're still in that kind of roller coaster of the startup world this many years afterwards. And I've suffered with anxiety with this. I think if you ask my wife, she says that I'm a different person to what I was before I started this. And that's tough to hear. And I would say that me personally, I think I struggle with the pressure of it. It's very hard to deal with. I have people close to me in my business that have not dealt with it very well, and I think that probably goes for a lot of people out there. There's a lot of guys and girls out there that are pushing every day, doing 16 hours a day or more, under incredible pressure, especially at the moment in this environment where it's really difficult to raise equity, to get people on board with what you're doing, because they're internally focused on their own projects that they've funded in the past, or their own portfolios, or they're just waiting to see what happens. And that builds even further pressure on people.
Yeah.
And I think I would absolutely encourage anybody out there listening to this that is going through that and struggles with it, and I'm one of them, I can tell you, talk about it. Reach out, speak to somebody, even if it's somebody that's not involved in the business. I mean, look, when I started this, I had a new baby within the first year of launching this. I now have 3 under 5, and a wife that works pretty much full time. And we struggle every day to make that work. And it's a constant kind of discussion with ourselves of, is it worth it? Are we putting the family first? Are we doing the best for our kids while doing this? And I guess that's a question everybody needs to answer on their own. But one thing that we do as a business, and it's only a small thing, but you can access Calm, which is an app, for free. We will cover it. We pay for it, or any version of it that you have. And honestly, for me, this really helps me. I don't struggle with sleeping so much. My wife will tell you I can fall asleep anywhere. But I have my struggles. I mean, I certainly struggle with my weight. I struggle with a little bit with anxiety, and having just a couple of minutes out in a day to either listen to something a bit relaxing. They have a number of different things within these apps that just, even the mindfulness stuff really helps. And it just brings you back. Yeah. But honestly, I've had a couple of chats over the years with different entrepreneurs that I know well, and especially in Zurich, that don't have anybody to talk to and don't know where to go with it, and are just kind of getting up every day, plowing through it, and just hoping it ends at some point. And I think, as I say, I don't want to kind of go into it too much because it starts to get a bit depressing, I guess. But if you are in that space, please just talk about it. Talk to somebody in or outside of the business. Don't sit on it.
Yeah.
Everybody has it. It's not. I know it's stigmatized a little bit, but it needs not to be.
Yeah.
And it's just the reality of building a business.
Absolutely. So, Ben, first of all, thank you so much for openly talking about this very, very important topic. I think that's exactly the first step that is so crucial, to bring it out there, that people know this is normal. Many other people, many other founders struggle with, mental health issues, because there is so much pressure in what we are doing, what we're building. We're building companies and we have a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff on our plate. When you think about the pressure, where does that actually come from? Do you think this comes from investors, from the business itself, or is parts of it also a bit self-made, where we actually think that we need to do more than we actually need to do, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as founders?
Yeah, I guess it's different for different people. I guess if I look at our own business, I guess the first point of pressure comes from the fact that we lend money, and lending money is already quite not a scary thing, but it's a pressure thing. I mean, if somebody doesn't pay you back, it's not great.
Of course, yeah.
So if you're the risk guy or they're in the risk team in our business, then a lot of pressure on you to make sure you do your job well. Yeah. And I guess for me, one of the bigger things was less about what I brought myself. It was more about the fact that we employ so many people. So we're about 60 people globally now, and we're going to probably go again that next year. And that's a lot of families. And rightly or wrongly, you somehow carry that a little bit on your shoulders. And that creates pressure in itself. I mean, and it's the reality of the world. People work for companies. Companies sometimes don't work out, and you have to get a new job. But I think as a founder, and especially as a company that's grown quite quickly, where you've not really, where that's very in your face, let's say, I think that for me drives a lot. I guess one of the things that we're starting to do a bit better these days and starting to recognize is a lot of our investors sit on our board, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. Mm-hmm. And they're there in a fiduciary responsibility for their investment more than anything. And I think sometimes if they don't understand exactly what you do, or they don't like what you do, or they're not, or they, I don't know, there's just clashes, then that can create, because they're your boss in the end, the board, and that can create a lot of downward pressure, certainly on the CEO or the founders. And I think what we've started to do as a business, I'm not suggesting we have a board that does that, by the way, but it's more the fact that I think a lot of startup boards are built up of investors, and I think something that the investors need to recognize a little bit, and some do, but is professionalizing boards sooner rather than later is a lot more helpful and releases a bit of pressure from the business, because they get relevant advice from experts in the field who have networks and influences in whatever you're doing, versus just being there as an investor's kind of watchdog to keep an eye on what you're up to. Mm-hmm. You have value add in the board, and I think that for us has really started. We started to professionalize our board last year, where we took founders off the board to show our willingness to want to do this, and put direct experts from the market into those board seats. And it's game changing. I mean, it's like having additional manpower out there and additional founders. I mean, they're really keen to help. They're really, not that our old board weren't, but they maybe had 20 investments that they sat on. So it was difficult from a capacity perspective for these guys to do that.
Yeah, right.
Where if you've got people that maybe only sit on 2 or 3 boards, but are experts in what they do, then the value add that they bring and the doors they open, and they just make your life a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. And I think the discussions at a board level become a bit more tuned to the business itself, which then, I don't know, all of that kind of stuff helps a lot, I think.
Absolutely. You also mentioned now, of course, the board. You said the Calm app to meditate, to have this personal break. You also said talking to other people within the company or outside the company can help to really deal with that pressure and with the mental health part. What else is a tactic or strategy that helped you along the way?
Yeah, I guess it's something we work on every day. There's no quick fix to this stuff. And I think I go through periods myself where I'm just like right now, I mean, to give you a flavor of what we're up to right now, we have 2 new markets this year, which we launched into, so the UK and the Netherlands. They're in their teething kind of phases of where we really need to spend a lot of time supporting them. They need a lot of equity. They need a lot of attention. We're doing a £200 million pound senior capital raise, which is in its kind of long-term sheet phase. So we've got 3 or 4 big global banks putting that money on the table in front of us that we need to close out. We're doing a Series B, and we're raising 50 in total. We've probably got another half of the half, so probably another 12 to 15 closing. Yeah. And then we look to close out the kind of last 10 to 15 in the next 3 to 4 months. Yeah. But that's a big raise in a difficult environment next to the big kind of debt capital raise on top of that, plus new markets. And then I guess plus generally the stress of what's going on at the moment with the war, with inflation, potentially going into a downward cycle of recession across Europe and other markets. And that's not pressure for our business. Our business actually does really well in recession because we're a structured product that's secured. So where everybody else backs away, we don't. We stand, and we're a sustainable product for our partners. And I think so. For us, this is not the worst place to be, but for our family, our people,
Sure.
this is getting harder for them. I mean, it's so all of this kind of stuff brings a ton of pressure this year to us, where I think we've all been under the cosh. I mean, if you ask anybody in our business, especially through the DD we've been going through recently, from many different angles, everybody is kind of up to here. And I think Christmas is something that everybody's looking forward to, kind of getting a couple of weeks out, really just switching off, relaxing. And I guess that's it, right? I think I'm learning, I'm not there yet, to try and not look at my phone and not read emails from kind of 6 to 8 in the evening when I've got the kids, and then the weekends, and it's super difficult. But you've got to kind of scratch out some existence for yourself outside of work to try and I don't know. I think fixing yourself is the first thing you should always try and do before you try and do anything else. And that for me is health. I need to do better at that. I need to spend more quality time with my kids. And those are, I guess, the other two things that I'm really working on, which I think will have an overall impact on me and my stress levels and my mental health, and then ultimately the business itself.
Yeah.
Because I can be more here, more present, more focused.
Absolutely. I have two things to add here, just from my very personal perspective. But one thing that always helped me, I call it like self-care day. So I would just go on a Saturday, just take the whole day to myself and just like go for a massage or hit the gym,
Nice.
go and get a new haircut, whatever, makes me happy. Go for a long walk in nature. Just really say, this is a day or just a few hours just to myself to really recover and value myself and take good care of myself. And
Yeah.
I think the second thing that also helped me tremendously, I use a platform called InstaHelp. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but it's basically online psychologists that you can then work with on a regular basis. So depending on the intensity, I usually do like a check-in once a month, but sometimes there are way more, personal topics or business topics that need more attention. So then I do 1 or 2 sessions a week. And it's very cost competitive from a Swiss perspective because they are usually sitting in Austria and Germany or somewhere else. And they are really like professional and certified psychologists or even psychotherapists who can really help you with the whole topics that you have that keep you busy, that stress you out. And getting professional help is not something to be ashamed of, but actually like a good coach to help you to perform better and really take good care of yourself. So these are two strategies that worked well for me. It's, again, very individual, but just if anybody relates to that, maybe it's worth to give it a shot.
Yeah, no, that's great. InstaHelp, you said.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, cool. No, I'll check it out. Yeah, no, I think it's good. I'm often in awe of my wife, who obviously manages me plus the 3 kids on a full-time job, and she's a career animal. I would say she's done really well. But she's carved that time out for herself where she goes running.
Nice.
And she's not run for many years. Obviously had 3 children very close together, so always been some form of pregnancy post or during, and now she's kind of getting up to she's done the 5K thing, and now she's doing the 10K.
Wow.
And I think if I look at that example of just, as you say, taking that little bit of time out for yourself makes a huge difference. It's something that I'm aspiring to. But yeah, no, it's great advice. Really great advice.
I really appreciate your openness to talk about this topic. There is one more thing I want to talk about to you before we actually wrap up the episode. And you actually recently participated in the Swiss Stock Exchange training program called the Sparks IPO Academy, which prepares companies for an IPO. So I was just curious, first of all, what actually motivated you to participate in that program?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, first and foremost, it was a fantastic program. I think SIX are really good at nurturing and trying to build up kind of the Swiss financial kind of ecosystem. And I think the Sparks program and the Sparks kind of exchange is a great example of that. Whether or not it'll be successful or not is a different matter, and I think I have some views on that. But yeah, I mean, like, as I mentioned, I've done an IPO in Switzerland before, which is quite a rare thing with Chembra. I had my own responsibilities for in that, so underwriting the transaction and taking care of all the relevant insurance parts that were within that. So I had a good view of that experience, but it was really great to be included in that kind of first wave of companies going through it. And it was a real kind of, well, it was a refresher, but it was also, I also learned quite a good few things in there as well for a business like ours. We didn't apply for it. We were selected, which was really nice. We were the only financial kind of services company in there. Everybody else came from different verticals, let's say, of different sectors. I guess some of the good things we took out of it were we're pretty ready if we want to do it. But I guess because we effectively work with a lot of banks and we're a financial institution, we're somewhat regulated by FINMA through the SRO process, a lot of our T's are crossed and a lot of our I's are dotted. So we have processes, process maps, we have tons of documentation, you name it, where if you're a company that makes drones, maybe that's less of a focus and you have a bit more of let's say, a way to go in getting ready for that.
Sure.
So I felt like our readiness to go into something like that would be quite strong. And I think the program itself, I could highly recommend. I think there were some great partners there that were, so the legal partners, the PR partners, the guys that ultimately help you with this process. And this process starts 12 months before you even go into it, right? So it's a well considered thing that you're gonna enter into. I think where I was less impressed was the banks. So the banks that were pitching in that program almost kind of didn't give me the comfort factor that they have the client base to support it. And I think liquidity in that type of structure, in that type of marketplace, is crucial.
Yeah.
And whether or not Sparks gains the ability to have that level of liquidity for companies of that size is the question mark for me. And if I base it on the first round with the banks, I'm not sure it would. So I think the banks really have to make a big kind of leap forward there with what kind of segment of their client base they approach with this versus the standard one, and really bring the masses to this marketplace to support that kind of structure. And I think if they can stand up to that challenge, then I think Sparks would be a great place for us to list in the future if that was what we wanted to do.
Absolutely. And you've already gone through an IPO. You now have basically the refresher about going IPO in, today. From your perspective and your experience, what are the biggest pros and the biggest cons of going IPO as a company?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think, obviously with an IPO, you're pulling your pants down, right, and showing everybody what you've got. Yeah. It's really that brutal. I mean, the memorandum has everything and anything in it, so you need to be really well prepared. The business needs to be well structured. You need to have everything, as I say, kind of T's crossed and I's dotted. It really needs to. It's a significant amount of work for the entire organization. So you need to be ready for that. And I think when you're in a growth phase, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be ready to be able to then deal with an IPO on top of that. As a business, it's just like, I just think it would be too much. I think you need to have kind of gone through quite a significant growth phase where you are still growing, but maybe a bit more steadily. It's a bit more day-to-day kind of running versus constantly trying to catch up with everything. So I think that's a key consideration for looking at doing that. Of course, it gives you much simpler and easier access to capital, which when you look at businesses in seed, Series A, Series B, Series C even, access to capital is incredibly time consuming. My team will tell you that when I'm fundraising, which is most of the time, I'm not present. I'm not in the business like I want to be. I thankfully have a great management team that can run the business and can deal with me not being there or not being as present as I'd like to be. But for a lot of businesses, that takes out critical resource for a long period of time. Right. So having an easy way to get that done and a faster way of getting that done that's very structured and simple to use is incredibly attractive. Should the liquidity be there? I mean, that's
Right.
on a normal exchange. I think that's kind of a bit of a given. So I guess for me, those are definitely interesting. I think from a founder's perspective, if you have preference rates and preference stocks, doing an IPO is definitely more efficient for yourself. All of those things get converted into common stock, and preference kind of goes out the window a little bit, typically. So it's a good exit route in that sense, depending on how many kind of preference type shares you issue. We've been reasonably lucky there in how we've been structured. I guess downsides are it's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly time consuming, both doing it and then running it and maintaining it. And it just changes the way the business needs to operate.
Right.
Because you need a certain level of training within the business to make sure that people are not talking outside of school in regards to future-looking statements. You need to have incredibly diligent and very structured processes around reporting and auditing, and all of that comes at a not that we don't today, but for a lot of businesses they don't. A lot of businesses don't necessarily need that if they're not in financial services. So I think that side of it needs to not be underestimated. I guess running just the process of being listed, I guess runs a couple of million a year in additional costs.
Well,
so there needs to be a serious consideration of that when you're looking at it. Obviously, a trade sale is a bit cleaner, but yeah, I guess for me, right now, if I had to put my finger on it, I would say for us an IPO is probably more likely than a trade sale, and probably my preferred route. But we will see.
No specific plans yet to go down that path.
No. Yeah. Still a bit too early. I think we've got a couple of years worth of solid growth ahead of us before we kind of get into being able to be, as a business, ready to do that, I think.
Right. Yeah. So Ben, to wrap up the episode, I have some rapid fire questions for you. I either give you different options to choose from or a simple question, and you have to answer in one sentence.
Okay.
You ready?
Not very good in one sentence, but I'll try.
Let's see. Switzerland, England, or Australia?
Switzerland.
Beer or wine?
Oh. I usually start with a beer and then move quickly to wine.
Good one. What would you never borrow from your friends?
Their children.
How many hours of sleep did you get last night?
Last night was good. I reckon it was about 9 hours, but I had a 90-minute break around 3 a.m. with my daughter who saw some pirates in her bedroom and didn't want to go back to sleep.
Right. IPO or trade sale?
IPO.
What do you wish you had done differently in your career, if anything?
Nothing. I'm very happy with how it is so far.
Nice. And the last one, mountains or lakes?
I'm a keen fisherman, so I would say lakes.
Okay, perfect.
Not that I've done it for a long time, but I do love fishing.
That's fine, yeah. Ben, thank you so much for your time and for the openness. Really appreciated the conversation with you. All the best, lots of success, and very curious to see where you will take TP24.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the podcast, and hopefully the listeners did as well. And if anybody wants to reach out on any of the subjects we've talked about or needs an ear, you can get in contact through Silvana, and I'm sure he'll give you my details. More than happy to have a chat with anybody who needs an open ear.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks a lot.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.